The agenda this week took stock of purpose-built rental stock in the province, assessed the impact of newly announced education reforms, assessed partisanship in Canada's Senate, and reconsidered the use of mammograms in cancer screening. The agenda's Week in Review begins exploring regional differences in Ontario's state of mind.
You have read the study. What jumped out at you?
We actually released our own Ontario Economic Report recently, just in February. And what really struck me about Andrew's study is how it kind of mirrored and spoke to, in many ways, the survey that we did of our members of businesses. In particular, we've looked at how Ontario has recovered from the recession, looking at employment growth with respect to Ontario's regions. And we found that, the Toronto and GTA area really outpaced everyone else. You can see across the province much lower employment growth over the past 15 years, and in the north actually a decline. And when you look at some of the data from Mowat's study, you find that there's a kind of sense of greater positivity in the economy in Toronto than there are in other regions. And that makes complete sense to us when we look at our data and see where employment growth has been. And so it's not surprising that Toronto is far more optimistic than other regions of Ontario.
Trish, what did you find?
Well, you go looking for differences and sometimes you find commonalities. And I thought that there were a lot of commonalities in terms of how people across this very different, diverse, expansive province look at different issues. The one finding that jumped out at me was job security, that the plurality, doesn't matter where you live, if your economy is getting left behind, if you're in economic distress, or if your economy is doing really well, the plurality of respondents said, we're worried about job security.
Okay, let's put those numbers up right now since you've come to it. Sheldon, here's the first of several graphs that we're going to share with our audience here. And the question they asked is, how concerned are you about full-time employment? And you're quite right. These numbers are, put it this way. Ashley is right. In the GTA and the 401 corridor and the sort of closer to those areas you get, there is a lot more concern. 65% in the GTA and 905 are concerned. In the 401 corridor, which goes all the way down to southwestern Ontario, 63% are concerned. Hamilton, Niagara, 63% again. In Eastern Ontario, 61%. The provincial average is 61%. How concerned are you about full-time employment in Toronto 416? 58%. Still more than half. This is interesting, though, Andrew. How concerned are you about full-time employment? In Northern Ontario, only 57%, the lowest number of those surveyed. That is opposite to what I suspect most people would think. How come?
Well, I think it's also opposite from what Ashley was saying, in the sense that they're also the most likely to say they're worried about the condition of their local economy, but they're feeling a little better about their jobs. I think it could have to do just with the nature of the labor market in more places. There's more churn. I think in a metropolitan, the major metropolitan area, there's probably more people moving in and out of temporary jobs than there might be in other parts of the province. But I just kind of want to get back to what both Trish and Ashley said, because I think they both captured the two sides of the coin that we're looking at. On a number of the questions where we might think that there would be big differences, there aren't, right? There's a lot of commonality of experience that comes out of this. And that's actually different from what Ontarians themselves think, because one of the questions in the survey was, do you think that people who live in urban and rural areas have the same values? And most Ontarians don't think that. They disagree. They think there must be differences. And yet we see on a number of questions there aren't. But there's one big exception to that, and that is those questions that are about how is your local community doing? How is your local economy doing? So Ashley pointed out one example. Another example is on trade, international trade. If you ask Ontarians about, do you like free trade? Should we have more trade agreements with other countries? They're a uniform agreement and positive feeling about that. If you ask Ontarians, how have the trade agreements we have now affected your local community? You get the pattern that Ashley pointed out, that those are the questions where there is an urban-rural difference. There's a north-south difference, but there's a general pattern where the bigger a city you live in, the more you think that free trade is working for you. The smaller a community you live in, the more you're not sure.
Ashley, I know you're not a demographer, but I do want to ask you this question anyway, because we are experiencing unemployment rates right now that haven't been this low in 4 decades. And yet you are still seeing, in some pockets of this province, 2/3 of the people saying they are very concerned about their prospects for employment. How does that make sense?
Well, that was one of the more fascinating things we saw in the data. How do you square that circle? In theory, people should be very confident when they look at the unemployment rate. They should see it as a seller's market for their labor, but that's not happening. Our assessment of this is related to the changing labor market. We're hearing a lot about disruption. We're hearing a lot about automation and AI. So people may be concerned about not necessarily their job right now, but what does the future of their job look like? Maybe they're thinking, I know what my skill set is, but is that skill set still going to be of value in the future? And that could create a lot of uncertainty. Anything you want to add in terms of that disconnect?
I actually think the respondents here have diagnosed the problem. The Ontario economy is undergoing a major shift. And so there's a lot of worry and uncertainty out there. Findings in this survey can be replicated and seen in other surveys, national and provincial, that show a declining number of people identify themselves as middle class that reveal a sense of anxiety about the future, especially when you start talking about your kids and your grandkids' future. So I think concern about the economy is the river that runs through it all.
You're seeing large companies buy rental housing. These people have to answer to their shareholders as well. And so they've recognized, I believe, positively, that you got to put money into these buildings and fix them up. And if you do it right and fix them up, then you could go to the landlord and tenant board and get a small increase even above the guidelines. And it results in a better living standard for the tenants, and they have to pay a little bit more rent for it. So I'm finding that those stories you may not read as much about. You read about the terrible buildings, but what I see out there is a lot of good landlords taking over these buildings, recognizing the value and realizing we better put money in if we want to make these buildings gain in value over the years.
You talk about a story that's out there, and I think, let's hit that on the head right now. There is a narrative out there that says that the landlords are money-grubbing, bad, evil people who are letting their buildings deteriorate, and the poor tenants who all they want to do is live in a nice place and pay a reasonable rent are getting screwed over. That's the narrative. I want to know how true that is. Kristen, what do you say?
Well, I mean, certainly in the neighborhoods that I represent, which includes St. James Town, which has a large number of these towers, and there's about 30 to 400 across the city.
This is downtown Toronto for those who live
Toronto,
outside
yes.
the area.
And so there's 3,400 of these residential towers across the city that are over 3 stories tall and have more than 10 units. 50% of them approximately are reaching that age of 60 years and older. And so when you have that old sort of housing stock and it hasn't been well kept, has not been well maintained, the investments have not been made in a timely fashion, a lot of those end-of-life systems that make up a building are coming to the end. And so what I'm seeing in the downtown area and across Toronto is landlords not doing their job and not keeping up the state of repair, which is why those statistics that you read off at the beginning of the show are not surprising at all. And that's actually quite commonplace and right across the city of Toronto.
Tony, let me get you to speak to that narrative that is out there in some quarters.
Absolutely, it's out there. Obviously, I think it is not representative of the entire industry. Not all things is ever all one way. No industry is perfect. There always are bad apples, and I'm not going to suggest that what Councillor Wontam has said is not true. We know there are a lot of old buildings that are reaching the end of their life cycle in certain pretty significant ways. So we know that. But in terms of the members that I represent, I mean, these are companies. Some are large, some are medium, some are small. They really want to do the right thing. They want to provide good housing, safe, reliable housing for their tenants. It's expensive to do, and there are challenges around being able to, as we spoke about already, how do you pay for these improvements? I mean, the money has to come from somewhere, and so we live in a rent control system, as we know. That does have limitations, obviously, on how much rents can go up by. The above guideline increase situation is one that just deserves some further discussion, and hopefully we'll get to it. There are challenges in that sort of system that's made it much more adversarial and difficult for both landlords and tenants to navigate that system. So how do we go about paying for these improvements? Yes, some companies are coming in and buying distressed buildings perhaps and are willing to invest millions of dollars into them. We're starting to see that. Perhaps that needs to happen more. But there really needs to be, I think, governments and industry, we need to work together to figure out how do we sort of come up with, improve the system so that landlords can figure out ways to work with tenants to get to be able to finance these significant improvements, which do cost significant amounts of money.
We'll follow up on that as our conversation continues. Joita, that narrative I outlined at the beginning there, how true is that in your view?
I think it's quite true, to be honest. And let's be clear, half of tenants saying that their buildings are rife with pest infestations, a third saying that their elevators break down monthly or more often. That's not a couple of bad apples. We've got to stop trying to skew the narrative such that it makes it seem as though it's a minority of bad outlier landlords. This is, and this term comes up in the public inquiry for Grenfell Tower, so I'll borrow it from there. This is an indication of a culture of non-compliance. Granted, these buildings that we're talking about were built in the post-war construction boom, so many of them are 50, 60, 70 years old, but had landlords been proactive and taken the initiative to maintain them from the get-go, we wouldn't have the kind of crises we have today in terms of the state of disrepair of our rental housing.
The Minister of Education gave a much discussed interview to Metro Morning the other day on CBC Radio. She told Matt Galloway the following. Can we bring this quote up, please, Sheldon? When students are currently preparing to go off to post-secondary education, we're hearing from professors and employers alike that they're lacking coping skills and they're lacking resiliency. By increasing class sizes in high school, we're preparing them for the reality of post-secondary as well as the world of work. Caroline, your comment on that.
I would like to see the evidence on that, because she said that yesterday on Metro Morning, but but she didn't reference anything. She just said that. I would like to see how it helps with coping skills and resiliency by moving class sizes up. You have to remember, Steve, that classes today look very different than they did many years ago. You don't have, many years ago, you probably have a class of 20 and 18 students in that class were what we call typical students. They would do well no matter what. Now you have classes with kids who have high needs. You have classes with kids with special needs. You have classes with kids who are learning English. You have a different makeup in a classroom than you did many years ago.
So it's way more complicated to
So it's a little
teach.
more complicated today. So how do you, I don't understand how you make a statement like that without some evidence backing it up.
Maddie, is there any evidence to suggest that the resiliency of students in a class of 30 going on to university is improved as opposed to if you were in a class of 20?
I don't believe so. I'm not sure.
So why'd you say
this? I don't think I could defend that statement. In fact, I showed my own kids in high school and they laughed at that and said that it was silly. And then there's a bit of irony attached to that when we're also, having a dialogue about mental health and the improvements of mental health in school. So if anything, that sort of goes against that mentality. Right? We really do need to support children in schools. And yes, as Carolyn says, when you're now going to see an increase in children with learning disabilities, autism, saturate a lot of these classrooms, which is going to demand more time from teachers. I don't think that's a smart talking point. I just, I think she should just be honest about it and say, we're trying to cut our costs. Yeah. We're having a minimal impact, and it is. I think they've done a good job with that. There's going to be a backlash, but I don't think, there's other jurisdictions, as they say, around Canada, other provinces that have, higher class sizes. Ontario is the only one that could brag with the lowest class sizes, but I have to throw in that Ontario also has one of the best education outcomes in Canada.
And if I can just
Canada
add, and in other provinces where maybe the class size average is funded at a higher average, in some provinces there are different agreements about what proportion of kids can be in. If you have a class, what proportion can have special needs or be English language learners? So that actually they've done it in a different way. The composition of the class makes it.
But I also have to throw in, like as I said earlier, it's more complex than just having larger class sizes in every class. You've got maybe perhaps the faculty of each school could look at it and say certain classes demand less students in certain subjects. And as you said, in law, you love to have that dialogue. And then there's certain other classes like drama or gym where you can have more. So they need to give that freedom to the schools to make those decisions.
Let me get back to the resiliency. And you know what, just for the heck of it, let me play devil's advocate and make the minister's argument to you, Annie, and you tell me what you think. If you go from, say, a class of 35 in grade 12 to a class in first-year university of 300 or 400,
Or 1,000.
or 1,000,
Yeah.
which is not unknown.
Yeah, no.
Do you have a better shot at adapting to that much more difficult learning atmosphere if you've come from a class of 35 as opposed to 22?
No, because really, this ends up being a kind of silly conversation, because really about what kinds of competencies do you have as a human being and what have you learned in school? So it does, again, I don't think there's any evidence that the number makes a difference. It's, are you being taught to collaborate? Are you being taught to take the knowledge you've gained in one area and apply it to another? Are you being taught to persist when things are hard or deal with failure? Those are the real things, and that's what we have to be. I wish we were having a different conversation about education now, about that instead. You know, what are the kind of new basics that all kids need? So pegging it to a number is kind of silly.
How about in Canada? Have we done any like world-class screening, mammography screening studies here?
Yes, I'd say we probably have the best screening study was done in Canada, the Canadian National Breast Screening Study.
When was that?
It started in 1980. They screened women for 5 screens over 4 years, annual screening, studied women distinctly under the age of 50, try to answer some of the questions that previous research couldn't answer.
And what conclusions did they come to?
They've also concluded that there was absolutely no lives saved in women under 40 or for women over 50.
No lives saved by having mammograms.
That's correct.
What kind of reception did that outcome get?
Well, you can imagine. By this time, of course, mammography had already become an industry. The radiology community was promoting strongly. The American Cancer Society was promoting strongly. In Canada, we were trying to get screening programs up. So by the time the Canadian research was actually published, at first in 1992, we already had a screening program in British Columbia and in Ontario. So you can imagine, with all of these people sort of vested in the idea of early detection, and along comes this massive study in Canada of 90,000 women that says, you know, wait a minute, it's actually not saving lives according to the data we have at this point. And then, of course, the Canadian study followed up, and it continued to find the same result, that it doesn't matter how long they looked at it. They followed women for 25 years, and it was the same result, that it just did not have impact on mortality. And it was considered heretical to say that. The radiologists and those and the scientists who truly believed in early detection said, wait a minute, they got the wrong answer. There must have been something wrong with the study.
And was there?
No, there wasn't, although no study is perfect. But there were accusations that there was a screw up in the randomization, purposely putting women in one group as opposed to another to get a different result. And the accusations were so strong that there had to be a forensic audit. And when that was done, involving distinguished scientists looking at the data and involving an accounting firm, a forensic accounting firm, to also help look at the data, they were completely exonerated, and found that there was absolutely nothing wrong with the study.
I want to be careful about how I ask this next question, because I don't want to paint everybody with the same brush. However, I think it's fair to say doctors, researchers, clinicians, the people who are involved in this world, they're very bright people, and they have a lot of education. And relative to most people in society, they're well paid. And they got egos. How much of that do you think's going on here?
I don't know if it's ego or if it's, when you vested your life in something, and your entire community is in the same box as you, there's an element of, it's not an ego or even arrogance. I think there's an element of
tunnel vision.
Tunnel vision, groupthink, I think, can come into play. And it's very hard for somebody who wants to be a critical thinker in that environment to question. And I don't think it's not just radiologists. I think we see that in different areas in the medical profession where it's very difficult to challenge something which is, becomes part of the status quo.
From 1980 to 2015, a period of time, incidentally, when the Liberals were in power about half the time, the Conservatives in power about half the time, there were 1,700 government bills that went through the Senate, and only 3 were rejected. And from 2011 to 2015, there was only 1 government bill that got amended. So I think we do need to put that to Senator Housakos, which it sounds like when the Conservatives had the majority in the Senate, they weren't much of a check on the House of Commons any more than the current ISG is on the current government. Fair to say?
No, not fair to say at all. And let me point out a couple of things.
Sure.
Number one and foremost, we all understand as senators, we're a chamber of sober second thought. We understand the elected legitimacy of the House of Commons, and we also understand we are a democracy fundamentally, and that's where the challenges are for the Senate. So we have an obligation and a responsibility to be very respectful when it comes to that. But there's a lot more than just legislation. There comes a point in time when you have a majority of senators that are representative of the government, which we currently have, and they have the added value of being appointed by this Prime Minister as independent senators. So when you have a number of Aboriginal senators during the marijuana debate get up and make very compelling speeches about how this is hurtful to their communities and how the Aboriginal communities cannot sustain and support the legalization of marijuana. And they made, like I said, compelling, very outstanding speeches in the chamber on behalf of the communities which we are appointed to represent. And each and every one of them fell in line and supported that legislation. As senators, we know the only time we defeat government legislation is when it is so egregious to the community, the provinces we represent. And we've seen time and time again a number of Trudeau-appointed senators get up and rip their shirts in indignation about a particular piece of legislation that is important to their constituency or the people they represent, and they just tumble over and vote for the legislation.
Okay, let me get Francis Lankin to comment on that part of your argument. Go ahead.
Well, again, I invite you to go back and look at the record prior to the Independent Senators Group forming and being there. And quite frankly, I mean, one of the first votes when I did arrive at the beginning that I watched on a budget bill, half the Conservatives voted in favor of the budget and half abstained to make a political point. But the whip had done a very fine job and counted the votes, shared with the other side, and made sure that it passed. They did that all the time. And so, by the way, did the Liberals when the Conservatives were in government. If you look further to the kind of amendments that have been debated and discussed, you will see there's a much more active, exploration of these things. And I think at the end of the day, what Senator Housakos said at the beginning in terms of we understand our role as senators, which is not to compete with the elected House of Commons, but to improve bills, to ensure that on constitutional compliance, charter compliance, regional impacts, minority, Indigenous impacts, that we take those things into particular account. And at the end of the day, we may send amendments over. It's going to be still a rare occasion for the Senate to reject an elected majority government's piece of legislation, most particularly when it was part of their election campaign. Those are the conventions that we work by. And if there's whipping of caucuses in a non-caucus group where people can vote where they want, we have to keep that in mind and bear witness to that as our jobs.
Nadia Varelli, let me get you to weigh in on this discussion happening between these two senators.
I think we need to broaden our understanding of sober second thought. For me, it's not just whether or not the Senate passes the bill or rejects the bill. Sober second thought is about giving deep consideration to what the House of Commons is doing. And this is what one of the original intents of the Senate was. And I think with this new Senate, especially with the Independent Senators Group, we are seeing a more thorough revision or a thorough look at bills. So you have that one statistic up where between 2011 and 2015, the Senate only recommended an amendment for one bill. Well, between, 2015 and 2018, they've recommended 14 amendments for 14 bills. Now, to be clear, not all of them are substantial amendments, but what we're seeing more and more is that the Senate is not afraid to challenge what government is doing. So yes, they may be voting along government lines or voting for government bills, but I do think what we're seeing is the Senate pushing back. We definitely saw that with S3. We definitely saw that with the cannabis bill. We're seeing this now with what's the new environmental impact
C69.
bill. C69, thank you. So we're seeing the Senate just conducting more thorough investigation, a thorough look at the bills. And I think that's what we need to accept or expect from the Senate, not whether or not they're, passing bills.
That is the Agenda's Week in Review for this Friday, March 22nd, 2019. You can see all of those conversations in full at tvo.org, on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, and on our Twitter feed, twitter.com/theagenda.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.